Antonin Artaud. Now, I want you to imagine perhaps you've gone to the theatre, but you go through the door, the foyer perhaps, and then you go, and it's not like any theatre you've been to. You are confronted by a space with no discernible stage. There are some chairs, but they seem to be like swiveling chairs, and you sit on them and you can turn around and other members of the audience can do the same. And then it gets dark and you can hear some liquid perhaps dripping. In fact, you might have felt some dripping on you. It could be blood. Is someone bleeding? And you look around you and audience members are looking the same, but then some of them start to hum or scream or groan, and then you suddenly realize you're not sure if you are in the show or the show is perhaps in you. I don't know. It's around you, certainly. And then lighting and sound gets louder, sort of beating drum beat, perhaps again and again. A sort of rhythm is sort of made around you, again, more screaming, and then strange sounds from and someone with a strange instrument you've never heard before, and sounds that are ear piercing sometimes, and then others that seem to be very ancient, and there are people passing by with that person who you thought was in the audience. It's a performer, perhaps, I don't know, but they're carrying this large mannequin, or are they a mannequin? I can't tell if they're a mannequin, or they seem to have turned from a mannequin to a human and back to a mannequin again, and screams, cries, sound. This is pretty scary stuff. I think it's scary. Some of it's quite funny. It's quite exhilarating for me. It's an extraordinary experience. What does it all mean? Well, this is the world of Antonin Artaud, and perhaps we'll find out a bit more about his theatre as we work through this. Susan Sontag draws a line in what she called recent theatre in Western Europe and the Americas when she was writing, which was in the 20th century, which of course is a long time ago now. And she's saying here that you can divide this history into two parts, before Artaud and after Artaud. Well, let's try and draw a line where that might be. Well, perhaps that could be in the 60s, where things might have changed. And we have a huge amount of influence. Artaud seemed more so, I would say, than Brecht, than Stanislavski, perhaps even put together. There is an argument that his influence at this time was huge. He was influencing rock bands, particularly people like The Doors, Jim Morrison, also classical music composers like John Cage, Allen Ginsberg, a beat poet. There were happenings, events going on all the way around the 60s that sort of perhaps could find their beginnings in Artaud. This is Allen Ginsberg, whose poem Howl. I'll put a link to it perhaps in the comments below. Artaud influenced Allen Ginsberg, and I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness. And madness is a theme we will keep returning to, as you'll find out with Artaud. But Ginsberg said, Artaud alone made accusation against America before me. Kerouac, another beat poet, was less enamored by Artaud than Ginsberg. He said, Artaud was the cookie that was always in my hair. And he sort of talks about the veins on this man's neck. And why don't you like young Artaud? Always, Kerouac was asked. And he says, because he boasts and boasts and brags, yeah. Because he's crazy, because he's mad. And you'll find out that that's potentially true. But this is the thing I think is most clear here. He never gives us the chance to talk. And if you want to aim anything at Artaud, perhaps it could be that, but he's trying to get into a different way of using language. And if you look at the poem Howl by Ginsberg, and Ginsberg is trying to do this too by using language in a way perhaps Artaud would have approved of a bit more. David Bowie drew a certain amount of influence from Artaud via his working relationship and friendship with Lindsay Kemp, who you can see above me there. There's a Lindsay and our friend David Bowie. And you can read what he says there. Take dangerous risks than you would do in real life. And this is the other side to Artaud. Is Artaud really more about a way of living, an attitude to life? Or is he about a certain aesthetic, a way of doing theatre? Or is it about philosophy? We'll come to all these things. Now, everything Artaud touched turned to ashes, says Charles Marovitz. And yes, Artaud has probably a long list of failure to his name, whether it's movies, theatre, collaboration, anything he did seemed to sort of fall apart. But Marovitz, the power of Artaud's thought was irresistible, and his vision inspired and continues to be inspirational. Now, he dismantles Stanislavski, and he undermines the dogma on which Brecht's epic theatre was based. Now let's look a bit back into his past a bit. At the age of 4, he had meningitis, a severe attack. Someone else who's sort of famous in a similar sort of upsetting people way as Artaud is Johnny Rotten, or John Lydon. He had meningitis from an early age, and it turned him angry, he said, made it anger as an energy. He talks about this, came out of that as his way of coping with that. He was told by the doctor to use anger as an energy. Well, Artaud perhaps took it a slightly different way, but he was depressive. He had a stammer. But his life might have been perhaps a shout against all this. This is sort of COD psychology. I don't know if it's true or not. We can have a look at this perhaps later. But at the end of his life, he was diagnosed with intestinal cancer. He died alone, seated at the foot of his bed, holding a shoe. Now, it's suspected he died of a lethal dose of the drug chloral. Whether he was aware of the lethality of the drug or not is not clear. But drugs are something that we'll come back to again and again with Artaud. He's not a great lover of them, funnily enough. He doesn't like the idea of being addicted to drugs. He doesn't like not being in control. And yet, after being given laudanum, he sort of used them for most of his life and was able to find peace. A man in pain most of his life. Drugs allowed it to alleviate that pain to some extent. So morphine, heroin, opium. You would these days definitely call him a bit of an addict to those drugs. Now, this is a story I like. This is just after the First World War. Artaud's in Berlin, and he's at this cafe that you can see up there. And let's go look inside that cafe. So it's quite a plush place. It's no longer there, by the way. If you go to Berlin, you can no longer see this cafe. It's no longer there. But in that cafe on this day was a certain Adolf Hitler. And there he is. And there he is having his tea and cake or something, which I don't know what would Hitler have in a cafe, do you think? A German cafe. There he is, sat there enjoying some sustenance. And Artaud is there as well. And what would Artaud eat? I don't know. I don't know if Artaud could eat much with he stoned out of his head on some opiates or whatever. But Artaud looks over and sees Hitler. And for some reason is drawn to him and goes over to him. And God knows what the conversation is going to be about. But then something happens and they have a fight. Kapow, bam, boom, all these things go on. And Otto wins the fight and Hitler's knocked to the ground, let's say. I mean, this is partly my imagination as well going on here, what exactly happens. But Artaud writes about this in 1943. Oh, it's in 1932, that's when it was. And in memory of this event in the cafe. There's a little poem from Artaud there. Because Artaud writes poetry. And there we are. We can see the results of the little fight there. Now, Artaud, as you can see here, was a handsome chap, shall we say. He appeared in films. There's film Napoleon he's in. He was an actor, a jobbing actor, if you like, but also a great surrealist. We'll come to that. But he always has this issue with his mind, and this is Susan Sontag writing about him here, and how he describes his mind as liquefying, deteriorating, empty, a place where words rot. And also, and this is, I think, quite sensible philosophy about the connection between body and mind and body. And his work from this time and throughout his career, if you like, denies any difference between art, thought, poetry and truth. The whole thing is a sort of completely together. Ideas abandon me, says Artaud. I've forgotten forms of thought. The real pain is to feel one's thoughts shift within oneself. My problem is I have never managed to possess my mind in its entirety. So if you get this idea here about Artaud, and that we are seeing things about thought and mind and not quite knowing where the delineation is between these different things, that we can start to see where perhaps his ideas of theatre come from, things coming in and out of consciousness, the pain of things moving and not quite staying still, mind, body, imagination, poetry, all entwined into one thing. So all these things become something about his aesthetic. This is how he will then go on to see the world, perhaps, and certainly to see the world of theatre. Now, it's another great story here. And there's always some lovely stories with Artaud. Not all of them lovely, but this is another great one. In August to September 1937, Antonin Artaud goes to Ireland to prepare for the coming apocalypse. Now, he will look back upon this upcoming apocalypse and quite reasonably say that he had premonitions, perhaps, of the coming apocalypse, which we could say is World War II. Perhaps he knew in his bones, this is what he would say, he knew in his bones that something disastrous was to befall Europe very, very soon. Anyway, here we are in Ireland, and I'm going to take Artaud there and place him there. There he is. He's slightly smaller than that. I've got my scales wrong here, but there you go. Artaud goes to Ireland, and he takes with him a cane, a walking cane, a stick, if you like, that he identified as having belonged to both Jesus Christ and St. Patrick. And he goes to Ireland to return this stick to its rightful owners, to the Irish, to say, look, this is yours, guys. And he writes this in a letter at the time of this, and he's saying the horrendous future of the world, these things are going to happen. But again, here it's you, not me, who is living in a state of illusion and blindness. I'm in the process of preparing something which is not some kind of daydream. Everyone else is too stupid to understand. He's the sensible one here, taking this over there. Now, he has no money. He's gone there living probably as a vagrant, and he's getting into arguments with people, trying to cadge money off people. He gets into trouble with the Dublin police, and he's deported from Ireland as an undesirable alien. And off he goes back to France. And, well, look, you saw those pictures of him earlier when he was but a youngster. And nearer the end of his life, you can see he's deteriorated quite a lot. But can you bear in mind, I'm going to put myself into this picture here, literally, as you can see. His hair's a bit like mine, actually, sort of lockdown hair he's got there, isn't he? But you can see he's deteriorated somewhat, yet in these pictures, he's younger than me. Now, don't say anything. like, yeah, we can see that. You don't look much better than him. To me, he looks like he's had a rough life, and I think he probably has quite. You see, what happens to him between the time he left Ireland and the time of his death is quite harrowing, remembering he's dying at the end of his bed from a drug overdose, holding his shoe. Well, look, he goes to the Rodez Asylum, not necessarily out of free will. His colleagues or whatever, they put him in the Rodez Asylum. Now, can you bear in mind, this is during World War II. To some extent, it's a place where he can be safe. And it's a place that can look after his increasingly alarming behavior, perhaps. And there he is. There's the Rodez Asylum, and you can see a doctor with him above. And this doctor is perhaps a controversial doctor to some extent, and we'll see why. I don't know if you know One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but this is a picture taken from that. I'm going to give you a little idea of what happened to Artaud, because he had ECT, electroconvulsive therapy. And this is a short description of it. The patient is strapped to a table. Electrodes are attached to the temples. An electric current is passed between the electrodes. Convulsions follow. They are observed to fall, these convulsions, into three phases. We have the tonic, lasting between 5 and 15 seconds, the clonic, lasting between 25 and 50 seconds, the stertorous, lasting between 1 and 2 minutes. I don't know if my pronunciation is correct there. Hopefully it is. The tonic phase consists of continuous muscular contraction without relaxation. The clonic, a violent contraction and relaxation. The stertorous, a profound sleep resembling apoplexy. Doctors notice that sufferers from epilepsy are never affected by schizophrenia, and a theory was developed that the two illnesses might be mutually exclusive. If this was so, it was reasoned it might be due to the effect upon the mind of the epileptic fit on patients suffering from schizophrenia. Now, after the seizures, after the application of the electric shock directly to the brain, the epileptic fit, which is kind of one way of describing it, which is induced, makes the patient go into a coma, which lasts between 10 and 15 minutes. Now, that was what happened to Artaud. Now, ECT still used in some treatments of people with a degree of a type of mental illness. Now, even today, doctors don't know exactly how it works and what it does, but in some occasions it can work. But they recommend you do it no more than 2 or 3 times, or perhaps even once, in a lifetime of a patient. Now, Artaud described each time it happened to him as dying a little death. His brain is changed as things go through there. And like I say, you only do it up to 3 times now in a lifetime. How many times did Artaud have it done? 51 times. 51 times. Now, to me, that's shocking. Literally. But let's go back to happier times before then. This is a poster from Le Théâtre Alfred Jarry, the Alfred Jarry Theatre. And this is some of the earlier work of Artaud. He was influenced by symbolism and particularly surrealism, and he was a part of this surrealist movement. And he founded this theatre along with Vitrac and Aron in 1926. As it says here, a Jarry theatre production is as thrilling as a game, like a card game with a whole audience taking part. So again, here's this already talking about breaking down sort of barriers between audience and performer. You endeavour to express what life's forgotten, was hidden, or is incapable of stating. The surrealists, of course, were interested in dreams. The idea, I don't know if you have seen the artworks of Dali, but this sort of surrealist ideas. We have sort of melting clocks, scorpions running around. Have a look at Dali and various other people from the surrealist movement. And Artaud was quite at one with this lot until things happen, but we'll come to that in a bit. Here's potentially a scene from one of the pieces. It's sort of Dadaist, and again, Dada is part of sort of hovering around the ideas of surrealism, so Dadaist ideas. So here's a montage. You're sticking things together that sort of juxtapose with each other. But he was kicked out of the surrealist movement because they became more interested in Marxism and psychology. Now, Artaud was anti-ideology, anti-Marxist, and anti-psychology. He didn't believe that this sort of science, of whether it be political science or brain science, was of any use. Which is interesting, of course, that psychologists, the scientific psychologists, got him in the end when they gave him the electroconvulsive therapy. But later, Breton, the founder of the surrealist movement and the writer of many of its manifestos, said this, that although Artaud proved too extreme for the surrealists, Artaud, according to Breton, should be saluted for his passionate, heroic negation of everything that causes us to be dead while alive. And that's very interesting idea. And I think a crucial way of thinking about Artaud, this thing about being dead while alive, that so many, he wants to shake people out of being dead while alive. You see, saying that your life, you've got to live to the full, really. I mean, life is more important than the way you're treating it with your everyday mundane existence. You've got to live to the full, but it's not just, hey, live life to the full. Artaud is even more extreme than those people going, live life to the full, go on holiday, whatever. No, Artaud is talking about living life to the full in quite an extreme way, and we'll come to what that might mean. Now, a bit lighter note here, but again, a surreal idea. I mean, the Marx Brothers, again, this is worth watching anyway. The Marx Brothers are superb music hall comedians, and who had transferred, not music hall, but that type of comedian, I suppose, a music hall in Britain, but a sort of more Italian American sort of vaudeville. The word is vaudeville comedians, and they made various films, famous ones. Night of the Opera, Day at the Races, that Queen named a couple of their albums after. There's Harpo Groucho Chico above me here, and a famous woman, it's Elizabeth something, I think. I can't remember her name. Damn it, I should have taken a note. But in one of their movies, Animal Crackers, there's a scene that Artaud picks up on in his manifestos and Theatre and Cruelty, Theatre and its Double writings. And he talks about this moment where a woman turns into a cow with the magic of cinema. Now, of course, we might say that that's a bit stereotypical nowadays, and a woman turning into a cow, that's not very PC, not very right on. But forgetting all that, he just sees it as something funny, and he's laughing at it. And the thing about laughing at things, you laugh at things sometimes because they're shocking, and laughter can shake out of you. You can be surprised at yourself laughing at something sometimes. I don't know if you've ever done this. Someone just falls. Yeah, typical. Someone falls over and trips over something, and it really hurts, and you laugh. You're laughing at them, and of course, it's not a very nice thing that you're laughing at, but it's the shock, the sort of reaction that you laugh at, and that's kind of what Artaud sort of gets with humour as well. There's a sort of shocking moment to it, and so you see her turn into a cow, and it's so funny. It's funny. So, writing about this, Artaud looks at the current theatre is in decline because it's lost any feeling for seriousness, and on the other hand, for laughter. It's no longer serious, it's no longer laughter. It's broken away from danger. So, humour as something that's dangerous, and humour as physical, anarchic, dissolving power. And I sort of love that idea. That humour here is not just a small thing. This is absolute anarchy that humour can bring to you, And it's physical as well. Laughing is such a physical act, isn't it? You're just sort of shoulders and your lungs and, you can, people die laughing, don't they, as well? There's not everyone, no, perhaps very few, by the way. If you're finding anything funny, don't worry, you're very unlikely to die. There's nothing to worry about here. There's hardly any jokes here either. Other things Artaud did. So he made films. He made one particular film, and he didn't make it as such. He wrote the screenplay for it, and it was called The Seashell and the Clergyman. And this is one of the stills from the film above me here, or I'm transposed upon. And he said here, that those moments of juxtaposition where you can put one thing next to another thing was played around in, and the things you can do in this film. Again, the ideas of subconscious, of surrealism, of dreamlike, nightmarish states that can bring us about. And he wrote also 2 other screenplays that weren't made into actual films, as far as I'm aware. One called 18 Seconds, and the other one, The Butcher's Revolt. And 18 Seconds, about a suicidal actor in moments before he shoots himself, and The Butcher's Revolt, presenting a savage world free from moral values. Again, these are the types of themes that keep emerging in Artaud's work. If you think about Just Before You Die being a very much a lifeful moment, it's the most lifeful moment. I mean, it's extraordinarily awful thought. And by the way, of course, if any of you are feeling upset or suicidal and things like that, don't become some sort of heroic Artaudian performer or something like that. You go and get help because you need it. Artaud's playing with themes here. And this thing about a savage world free from moral values. And again, we'll see how these things unfold as themes in Artaud's work. Now, this isn't Artaud. This is a Salvador Dali and Brunel film. And perhaps because this film sort of looks at Artaud's work, takes a bit of influence from it and becomes more famous because of this very horrible scene, which I've got here, which is someone slicing their eye with a razor blade going through their eye, which was filmed with a hard-boiled egg, by the way. And again, this juxtaposition, putting things together to create this. I'm going to get rid of that because it's quite a horrible thing to look at. But that probably did become more famous than the Artaud films. So Artaud again, sort of not quite succeeding. It's you're doing very well, Artaud, but this film's better because it's got a horrific scene in it that everyone goes, oh, I'll go and see that, because people like being shocked. The audience like to go to see things. As you know, if you've ever been to a horror movie or anything like that, you like a certain amount of shock, horror. Now, this is from Nin's writings about a talk on the Black Death, about the plague. And Artaud was at this talk because he's fascinated by the idea of plague. And I think if any time to think about Artaud is a time during, a pandemic, if any time, because Artaud takes on the artistic possibilities of pandemics. Now, he was a bit bored by what was going on in this talk. He said, that's not the way. Merde, that's not the way he spoke in French all the time. It's not the way you present the ideas we're talking about here. And he decided to say, forget this. You talk. Remember this thing about, said earlier about someone he's taught us not to, we no longer talk. We no longer talk. Artaud didn't want to talk. He wanted a show, and he therefore decided to present the Black Death by twisting and turning his body, screaming, with the result, and this is quite important, I expect, that the entire audience, except for a few friends of Artaud, left. And there he is, screaming, and so you can imagine this. You can see why you might be so embarrassed, because that shock is like, oh God, who's that nutter? Artaud might be the sort of person who gets on the bus and sits next to you and then decides you need him to reenact what it's like to have the Black Death. You might be slightly embarrassed. You might get off at the next stop in a very sort of British apologetic way, perhaps. Yeah, challenging friend to have around, especially as he didn't have any money as well, so he would always be you around. But Nin was very taken by this, and she wrote a book, Incest, where this is part of it, and incest is another theme that Artaud will use and talk about because, of course, it's shocking. There's something primal about it, and primally we reject it as well. So these kind of themes, again, shock, screaming, twisting, physical ideas of communication, rather than just saying, oh, the Black Death, blah, 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 blah. Now, Blin, who worked with Artaud on a production of Sensi, fundamentally Artaud's importance in the theatre means less than his importance on a philosophical level. And this is where we will get into the meat and the bones, literally, perhaps, of what Artaud tells us. All right. First of all, it's an idea of doubles. Now, if you try to say Artaud means this, Artaud means that, you will get into trouble straight away, because other people say, it's not quite that. It's not quite that. So he writes sometimes very clearly and sometimes in an obscure way. And like all people over a lifetime, no matter how short your life is, you will contradict things that you said before and say after. He likes the idea of doubles. he keeps writing about them, and I think he likes the idea, and then he keeps trying to explore, because Artaud actually does like language. He does like language, but perhaps he gives them sometimes a sort of dreamlike sort of interpretation that he comes to him, this is what I mean by doubles, this is what I mean. But let's try and get some sort of idea of what he might mean. If theatre is the double of life, then life is the double of true theatre. And the theatre of cruelty, by the way, is the only true theatre. So if theatre is the double of life, right? So let's say there's a naturalistic production going on and it's trying to present life. Then you come out of that and your life is still the same and all that. But life, the double of true theatre, you're going to go along to a piece of theatre of cruelty and your life is going to change to double to that. Rather than the double being the theatre, you become the double of the theatre. So this alters you in some way. And again, it's right deep down, metaphysically, to the bone. The double, as it is written by someone who's writing about Artaud, the 51 Shocks of Artaud, the double is the dark force released by plague or theatre, a haunting presence which represents all that is hidden. So all those things inside you, inside you, but also inside us, inside the world, inside humanity, inside, well, perhaps the universe, the cosmos, again, all these things that are tied together in some way. All these darker forces there that we need to release within us, if you like. Yeah. And plague can do this. There's a rather interesting picture by Artaud there of the plague, and he did lots of he was encouraged to draw at Rodez Asylum, and he did these lots of sketches, and again, quite a few of them are on internet if you want to have a look at them. But theatre, like plague, is made in the image of slaughter. And so, once the plague is established, normal social order collapses. Now, I don't know if you think the same way, perhaps, as ways things have started to fall apart, perhaps during a pandemic. But we could say that people have found themselves challenged mentally, physically, socially. People have been getting angrier, perhaps, depressed, perhaps. There have been riots, there have been demonstrations, there have been people on the streets. There's the whole Black Lives Matter protest, these sorts of things. And massive shifts of belief and then disbelief in governments. And around the world, we've seen, Trump might actually say the reason he's no longer in power is because of pandemic. But anyway, nothing left except death or drastic purification. The effect of the theatre is as beneficial as the plague, impelling us to see ourselves as we are, making the masks fall and divulging our world's lies. And this is it, to see the world, the normal world, as a world that lies to you, that's not truthful. Now, I don't want to get into QAnon here and talk about fake news and false and alternative facts and things like that. He's not talking about alternative facts or stuff like that. He's not some sort of conspiracy theorist, though he does have his moments, as we've seen earlier on, going to Ireland with a stick. But dark powers, hidden strength. Now these sort of doubles as well, that we have hidden strength in us. But the only time you're going to find out that hidden strength is through chaos and disorder and perhaps times of plague. You become more heroic than you would have been if you hadn't been faced by these things. And this is how theatre can work as well as plague. So theatre is a double of plague, and plague, does this, and this is what theatre can do too. Now, Artaud's idea was a theatre of cruelty. Now, what did he mean by cruelty? Is it being cruel to you, being nasty to you? Would you go along to the theatre of cruelty? Oh, I'm going along to a nice production. Where are you going? Oh, I'm going to the theatre of cruelty. It's going to be horrible. Things are going to be nasty, and someone's going to tell me off without any reason. It's just cruel. Is it cruel to be kind? Well, perhaps not. It's not that sort of cruelty. So what did he mean by cruelty? Well, I'm going to suggest he meant two things, basically. Cruelty is rigor, discipline, if you like, or cruelty is life. And let's expand on that. There can be no spectacle without an element of cruelty or rigor or life in each show. Metaphysics must be made to enter the mind through the body, through the skin, through the body. I'll repeat this a couple of times. So cruelty means rigor, applied rigor, absolute decision, and one-way determination. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. We're absolutely determined to do it. Now, we're starting to see, well, hang on a minute. Where does this go? Well, a lot of this goes into performance and performer and discipline of performer. And cruelty is lucid, a rigid direction. And this is key. Submission to necessity. So there's no cruelty without consciousness. You need to be conscious of and do what you have to do. Consciousness of every action. The colour of blood, cruel touch. To live is always through the death of someone else. Now, to some extent, that's also through the death of yourself or in some way. And let's unpick that. Cruelty. This is Franco Ruffini talking about it. And he's written this wonderful piece called Artaud Must Be Taken Literally. So what did Artaud mean by theatre of cruelty, Ruffini writes? Cruelty is appetite for life, cosmic rigor. There we go. The connection to the cosmos. Implacable necessity. Now, cruelty, life, necessity. Life as being conscious of it. And therefore, what are you more conscious of with life? Well, you're more conscious of what life is when you're conscious of it not being there, conscious of death. So death gives you a focus on life. Hence plague. Plague, surrounded by deaths, makes you start to unpick what's life about, what's it for, why are we here? And these big metaphysical questions that come to enter through. But he doesn't want you just to think, I think metaphysically, blah, blah, blah. No, he wants you to feel this. You feel life. And life comes to you through work, if you like, appetites, will, desire, doing stuff in such a disciplined way that you physically begin to feel what that's about. Now, we are free to accept or reject ourselves in this sort of life. Now, I think Artaud thought that most of us rejected this. Most of us didn't realise or don't realise what life is. We surround ourselves with mundanities. We're on TikTok. TikTok. There's me saying, well, man, or whatever you're doing. That's it. You're scrolling through Twitter and your life is pretty mundane and dull, and really you're trying to spend time filling in time rather than experience life, yourself connected to the cosmos. Now, what does that mean? Well, necessity. necessity. Yeah. What it's necessary to do. Living, breathing necessity. And submitting to it. Yeah, you have what you must do, and you must submit to that. I'll give you an idea. This is a perfectly simple idea. So this is going to be based on a student. Yeah, you have to write an essay. Yeah, you have to write an essay. Now, the first thought of many students is, right, I'm going to put it to the back of my mind and not do the essay. In other words, I'm not going to be conscious of it. I'm going to try and let it sort of go off my radar, because it's too painful. And when you finally give it in a few weeks late, you're going to say, here's your essay, miss. Here's your essay, sir. And this is the way of it. But no, it shouldn't be that. First of all, you've got to submit to it. So the teacher gives you an essay, and I want you to take that on board. They give you an essay and you say, yes, thank you for this essay. I will put every ounce of my being into writing this essay. Yeah, you have to do it. You submit to it. Yeah, I am going to do this. And you don't just say that, you get on and do it from day one, and you put your heart and soul into it. Yeah, your blood into it. You write it in blood. Why not write it in blood and spit and goo from your nose and wipe it in? Your very heart and soul is put into this essay. Are you screaming with the passion around this essay? And it's your essay. It's not the teacher's essay. You don't give him back, here's your essay, miss. This is your essay. So when you give it back to your teacher, here's my essay, miss. And they don't want to touch it because it's so soiled and covered in things like your very lifeblood is in this essay. Yeah? And by submitting to it, you then get to a certain level above that when you're absolutely in harmony with it. So you're not only submitting to it, you've taken things to a higher level. You're in complete harmony, completely at one with this essay writing. Another way that Artaud described this was being alive within the score. Now, this is Jacqueline Dupre, who did one of the most famous concerts, or what she was known for, Elgar's Cello Concerto, particularly, because when she played it, people said it was so much better than when other people played it. Now, why? Let's say there are technically proficient cellists. They're all of an equal. Technically the same. And the score is in front of them, and they're reproducing the score. But one of them has something extra. They're alive within that score. They're alive within what they must do. Yeah? Let's go back. They're in harmony with what they must do. They absolutely at one with it. The person who does the essay, who's really submitted to it, has put their heart, soul, passion, everything about them has been completely focused on this essay, and they've given it in and it's theirs, That's the kid in your class who's alive within the score. Yeah, that's the person who's in harmony with their necessity. They submit to it, they're in harmony with it, and they're alive within all the constraints that they have in life set up around them. And for Artaud, this is a kind of cosmic rigor. The absolute discipline and focus of us is actually at our most alive. We are at one, not just with ourselves, with our work, but with the cosmos, where we come from, where we are. We are at one. We're not separate to the world. We're not separate to the cosmos. We are part of it. And the way we find this out is by completely being full of discipline, full of focus, full of absolute diligence and discipline. And we feel it. We feel this. Yeah. Another way to put this is signaling through the flames. And this goes back to the focus on what life is. Signaling through the flames. And Artaud says an artist, a performer, should be like someone burning at the stake, signaling through the flames. This is the special role of the great artist, is what we are showing here is that we know life is finite, that we're connected to this great cosmos in some way, that our life is not always going to be here. And that knowledge makes us do things with more power and insight and feeling, because we know it's not going to be here forever. Most people want to ignore this fact, They don't want to think of their ultimate demise. They spend life ignoring that. Artaud says that should give you power. The fact that you won't always be here makes you be here. Yeah. And that you've got to scream out to the world, this is life. Yeah. This is the cosmic rigor. This is the focus. This is the diligence. This is cruelty. Hence, cruelty is life. Now, other things he did. He went to Mexico for a bit, and he participated in a drug-like ritual, a mescaline, and he was very taken by shamanic ritualistic practices, which again he thinks was a kind of signaling through the flames, this sort of communication of things beyond our everyday. And ritual to him is a return to tradition where man is not full of ego. Here I am, I'm a great actor. I am the great, wonderful actor. He's in complete union. The performer is in complete union with nature and earth and magic. Not like, just like that, magic. There's rabbit, hat, rabbit. Not that sort of magic. Magic, as in ritual and strange things appearing, perhaps. You'll find this in a sort of religious thing. You'll certainly find it if you're taking lots of drugs, I suppose. Again, I wouldn't recommend Artaud's lifestyle. I hasten to add, I'm not saying these are a good thing for you to get involved in, but it is good to look at Balinese dancers. And again, they came to Paris, and Artaud went to see some Balinese dancers as part of a Paris exhibition of international acts and cultural acts and artifacts. And he went to see the Balinese dancers, and he was very taken by them. And what he liked was the dancers' movements had a precision, a discipline, but they weren't mechanical. They had their score, but they were alive within it. And he sort of saw this. Now, people argue about whether Artaud misunderstood what was actually going on, but, that's by the by. What he got from it was this. They were animated by a consciousness, by life, you see, cruelty, life. In their very necessity, they have to do this. But to Artaud, this was a proof that a theatre of cruelty was really possible. And he wrote about Oriental and Western theatre. Now, Oriental is a term that nowadays perhaps we balk at, some of us. But what he was taking from it. And again, people might say it was a misunderstanding, but this is not the point. What Artaud took from it was its metaphysical tendencies, and he compared that to Western theatre's psychological tendencies. And he liked the way forms assumed meaning and significance on a variety of different levels. And he would use this in his theatre. So, the effect of this on the theatre and its double. Tradition, double of life. Now, in acting tradition, one cannot do what one wants. You have to do the moves that the Balinese dance tells you. And you can't just do a series of predetermined movements, because if you just do that, it looks like you're not involved. It looks empty. It's not true. So this is where necessity comes in. You want to do what you have to do. So you have to do the Balinese dance. You've got to dance in this way, whether you like it or not. Jacqueline Dupre has to play her cello in that way. She's completely and utterly shaped by the music in front of her and the instrument and everything. A ballet dancer, same thing. All these things, you're so constrained, you've got no freedom. Yet within that lack of freedom, within those heavy, heavy constraints, true performers are found, because they're the ones that bring something extra. They're the ones that have the discipline, the focus, the absolute cosmic rigor, if you like. And this is what impression was left by the Balinese dancers, whether it's true of Balinese dance or not. That's what Artaud found from it. Now, Sensi is a play by Shelley based on a story, but Artaud has sort of adapted it. It's got murder in there. It's got incest in there. Two of the things that Artaud likes to play around with. Arguably, it's the only full-length play that Artaud wrote, and we can talk about Jet du Sang later. He performed in this play and directed it, but he said, look, it's not theatre of cruelty yet, but it's preparation for it. And of course, being Artaud, it was badly received. No one liked it. And 17 days later, it was finished. The run had finished, and Artaud was in absolute despair and with absolutely no money at all. And perhaps this is why he sort of gets into all writing is pig shit. No more masterpieces. Masterpieces of the past are good for the past. They're not good for us, he's writing. He wants a theatre in which violent physical images crush and hypnotize the sensibility of the spectator, seized by theatre as a whirlwind of higher forces. Forget all this writing stuff, We want more going on than just that. And this is the metaphysics bit, of course. Those who come to our theatre must understand they are participating in a mystical pursuit through which an important part of the mind and consciousness may finally be saved or lost. He's losing faith in words completely. Against the dictatorship of words. Language is to be used as a form of incantation, that words don't communicate to you in the way that they do in the psychological theatre of psychological Western tradition. This is one of Artaud's poems. This is written back towards the end of his life as a radio play. I'm using this as sort of an example of words having something of the meaning you have in dreams. You can listen to Artaud's version of this online. There you can look towards it and some other people's versions of it as well. Obviously, this is I was going to say in English, but some of it is. Artaud's version is very much in French. It was a radio play and it was broadcast. to have done with the judgment of God. Crei pukte, crei pukte, everything must be arranged pectile, crei to a hair pectile, in a fulminating order. I did see a version of this, not as a radio play, as a performer, and it was quite unnerving and actually very good and much better than my version there, I must say. And it's much longer than that. It's sort of more of an epic piece of poetry. But here we go. Abandoned psychology. Old Sigmund Freud up here, he gets the boot. Psychological theatre has rendered us unaccustomed to the direct violent action theatre must have to shake us out of our sort of complacency, remember that, and bring us into contact with life, what life is. And one of the things that sort of Artaud really liked and showed him what his theatre could be is a picture of his theatre. If you like, it's this picture of Lot and his daughters. This is at the Louvre. And Artaud, at one point when he was in Paris, would go and visit this almost every day. A medieval painting by Lucas van Leyden. Again, there's a hint of incest right at the centre of this. But look, this painting is what theatre ought to be. A physical place that needs to be filled, and it ought to be allowed to speak its own concrete language. Theatre has its own concrete language. It's not written language. It's a language of all the elements of theatre. Now, if you look at this piece of painting and think of it, putting yourself right in the centre of it, a bit like I can. Here I am, right in the center of it. And above me, the sky is falling in, and the buildings are collapsing and things are going on around me. And there's something going on behind my head here, which I'm not quite sure about. All these things going on, yeah? Well, that's where theatre could be. We could be in the middle of this painting and stuff going on around us. Some would be words we would understand, but some of it would be things we would only feel. And we're not quite sure, but there's something cosmic going on here. There's a great explosion from the sky. The sky's falling in. This is one of the recurring dreams. Artaud's a bit like Chicken Licken in this aspect that he's worried about the sky falling on his head. The sky will fall on our heads. That's part of signaling through the flames. Things are going to come to an end at some point. But anyway, let's get on. The concrete language of the state we live in must be destroyed. Now, that's quite extreme stuff here. The concrete language of the stage is a language halfway between gesture and thought. It's a physical language aimed at the senses, independent of speech, a poetry for the senses, composed of everything filling the stage, appealing to the senses instead of appealing directly to the mind. So the mise en scène, everything that you can see and hear, the visual and acoustic, the arrangement of the scenery, props, everything, and the actors and the performers and everything you see around you, the mise en scène is central to what he's talking about, okay? So, and this is from his manifesto, first manifesto and second manifesto. The theatre space must have direct contact between audience and performers, immersing the audience in action. Empty spaces become holy places in which to perform the poetry in space. It's an immersive experience. I went to see a group called De la Garde at the Roundhouse. Now, the Roundhouse is an excellent sort of example, perhaps, of the space in which Artaud wants to perform in. Like, he talks about hangars or barn-like buildings, but a single undivided locale, direct contact will be established between audience and show, actors and audience. Now, the Roundhouse used to be a railway turning shed where trains would go in and turn and come out going in the same direction. That's what it was built for. So an industrial building that's there in Camden in North London. And if you can ever go and see a show, if we are ever allowed to go and see shows again, then please go there and see if you can see an Artaudian-like extravaganza or any other hangar barn-like building. And De la Garde, I think it's still doing the rounds. This particular show of theirs is but around the world. Probably on pause now, of course. But it's a sensory theatre. Look here. There we feel the water, or is it water, coming down on us. Metaphysics being made to re-enter our minds through our bodies, through the skin. Here we can feel it on the skin. This is De la Garda. This happened. I went to see this. You got soaked, at points. Some of the kids, because I took a group of students to see it. Some of them were terrified of getting wet. That's how far off they are from experiencing true theatre. And when we get wet, yes, you might get a bit wet. God's sake, they don't go out so soft with these children. They wouldn't go out if it's slightly wet outside. If it's raining. God, dear, oh dear. Anyway, an external assault of the tempest, storms, around you. This is Circus Archaeos, who were a sort of anarchic punk sort of circus troupe. Had no animals, they had cars and motorbikes instead, and you can see lots of sparks there, and this felt quite dangerous as well, things like that going on. An external assault of just like going out in a storm, stormy weather. You don't go to the beach here on a nice warm day with Artaud. He'll take you to the Atlantic coast on a cliff during a storm. That's what it's like to go and see an Artaud production. Spectacle, it's all around you, it's above you. Now Artaud talks about ways of doing this, but I particularly like this way of doing it with De la Garda. They're hanging there above you, and you can see the audience reaching out to touch the performers there. Action in 4 cardinal points in these hangar-like buildings. Artaud starts to lose his imagination a bit here because he's trying to think of something that's never been thought of before. So he thinks, actually, we do need a few areas where people can be. So he says, right, 4 cardinal points, north, south, east, west. There'll be special areas that the actors can use. So a bit of a lack of imagination there, perhaps, but he wasn't able to make his things come true. Just as Leonardo da Vinci couldn't build a helicopter, so he had no idea if it was going to work. Artaud technically wasn't able to do whatever he really wanted to imagine. Okay. Number one, he didn't have the money for it, let alone the technology being available. That is available to today. He also talks about a central performing area where you get to the climax of the show, everything comes round. And actually, in quite a few of these type productions, we can see there, De la Garda, I think this is as well, come to an end at a certain point, and the audience gets shoved out of the way in order to experience the end of the show here. But this is the slightly ridiculous thing with Artaud. Instead of thinking of an audience being able to stand up, he thinks, no, let's have them on swiveling chairs. So he gets rid of the auditorium's ornaments and all this stuff, and the audience seated below these ornaments. But in the middle of the whole thing, people on swiveling chairs, allowing them to follow the show taking place around them. No, says I. Just have them stood up and then they can walk around, free them some more. And of course, the shows that we're talking about now, the De la Gardas of this world, the immersive theatre troupes of this world, they have the audience standing up and walking around now. Engulfing. This is one of Artaud's ways of describing engulfing the audience. And here we can see the performers engulfing the audience. This has got this sort of a plastic thing above them here, and they come down and through this sort of thing, and you can press against them and push them up and all that, like they're in some sort of balloon here. But the whole show surrounds you, goes around you. Artaud talks about overhead galleries, so it's a bit like, what was that strange musical Andrew Lloyd Webber did about trains that go around a theatre? That's kind of Artaudish, but the idea of Artaud having some sort of strange sort of musical about trains, nothing like it. There'll be screaming going on, and these will be life and death chases around. The overhead galleries can be replaced here, as we said earlier. De la Garda had these people on ropes being held by stagehands who are also in and amongst the audience here. You're experiencing the whole thing as a real life thing. Sensations, you're feeling it. You're feeling the sensations. This is Punch Drunk, a kind of immersive theatre group. Again, I think this is the Mask of the Red Death, perhaps, one of their shows. Again, fantastic. You're putting yourself right in the middle of it. It's about sensations. You might not be getting the story. The words will have something of the meaning they have in dreams. They're not necessarily coming through to you in a psychological sense, in a sense of meaning that you can immediately say, oh, that's what it was about. It's a feeling. Sensations are what matters. Concrete language of the stage, of course, includes music. So not just auditorium and audience and all these things. Music and the musical instruments will be part of the set. There'll be ancient, forgotten instruments, or perhaps even invent new ones. But there might be unbearable and piercing sounds. Again, this is what you can do now. Of course, that perhaps Artaud couldn't do it in those days because they didn't have the amplification. I mean, even in the 60s, the Beatles famously went on tour to the Shea Stadium and the audience were screaming, a very Artaudian thing, by the way. But you couldn't hear the Beatles because their music wasn't loud enough, Hey. Gesture. Mythical, extreme can be, lyrical, archetypal, but non-naturalistic. It's not a sign of social status. It's not gestus in the social gestus sort of Brechtian sense. It's not a sign of the character's psychology. It's telling stories. And I've got here Katakali hand that, sort of things he's drawn to. And again, ballet does this to some extent, that you have a series of gestures that mean certain things. Well, the hands in Katak dancing, they communicate certain things. Ritualistic costumes that are esoteric. They reveal secret truths, dark powers. I mean, if you saw this coming down the street, you wouldn't say, well, that's a realistic performer. You say, whoa, what's going on there? Perhaps, But if you knew the tradition, of course, then you perhaps wouldn't have that shock. It'd be part of your tradition. But again, you might have the shock of the way the performer inhabits the rituals, the ritualistic costume, what they have to do. Decor, no decor. Hieroglyphic characters. And here's a nice tempest. 30-foot high effigies of King Lear's beard in the storm. This is Artaud writing here. Objects of unknown form and purpose are enough to fill this function. So hieroglyphic characters, everything sort of has a strange meaning that can be interpreted, but you perhaps will see it as a set of hieroglyphs. Perhaps he's talking about hieroglyphs without complete understanding. You might come across these hieroglyphs as someone coming across a tomb for the first time, no Rosetta Stone or whatever, not understanding what these characters mean precisely, but seeing the repetition of it, feeling what might be there. And King Lear's beard in the storm. I mean, the storm moment in King Lear is, of course, when Lear is at arguably his maddest, raging against the storm. And this gives you a sort of idea of Artaudian sort of theatre of cruelty, raging against the storm. Puppets, huge masks, bigger than us, objects of strange proportions, emphasizing ritual, ceremony, magic again, So these it's like voodoo dolls, perhaps, sticking pins in and things like that. They're slightly, it's not Punch and Judy, or it's not even it's not the Muppets, put it that way. Posture. Actors must be neutral, completely receptive to what they have to do with utmost malleability. Receptive to what they have to do. There you go. That's the necessity. Receptive to it means you're submitting to it. And you have utmost malleability. In other words, you're completely trusting a director or someone to shape you into the shapes you do. This is Etienne Decroux, who taught Marcel Marceau. He worked in a Parisian basement he called the Kitchen years ago, and I think actors there had to work 6 days a week, and they were allowed half an hour break a day. The rest of the time was complete diligence and discipline and disciplined movement work. And they weren't allowed ever to go out and perform, by the way. They just had to do this work. So if you performed, you know, you had to leave. The crew wanted nothing to do with Marceau. Oh, go off, you be a mime artist or something low down like that. You know, you weren't in this sort of monastic, sort of holy theatre sort of place where you give in your entire life and soul to the crew's work. But this is one of my ways of seeing the discipline here of the performer that was needed, that the crew was asking for. It was similar to what Artaud is asking for here. Incantation, the theatrical language of words, speech prior to words. So before language was invented, what noises would we make? Language is a virus. We catch it, you know. Vocal range, laughter. You remember laughter? Yeah, that would be pre-language. Orgasmic groans, pre-language, pre-words. Sorry, anti-text ideas, and there'll be coding, and you know, this will be all notified. Everything's written down. It's not for Artaud. It's not going to be sort of you're able to do what you want here. You're absolutely within the score. You have to do what you're told, but you have to find your life within it, of course. You've got to be signaling through the flames when you do all this. Screams and groans. A shout, he said, could be transmitted by word of mouth from one end to the other with a succession of amplifications and inflections, apparitions, surprise. You know, when you go to this, again, when you could go to the cinema and you get that sound effect that goes around you and all that. Well, Artaud was talking about that, but was unable to see it into fruition. But he wants that to go around you, the sounds, the imperceptible sounds, and then screams and groans that you're not sure where it's coming from, and you're spinning around on your swiveling chair trying to appreciate where all these things might have come from. Set design, minimal, tangential, things off at tangents. Metaphysical space, again, surreal, representing our inner worlds. Ritual, ceremony, magic again. This is a Robert Wilson set design. I think Robert Wilson's work perhaps suggests a lot of what Artaud might have meant in some ways. This is Robert Wilson's production of Wojciech. And again, look at the actors here, as well as the set, the windows there just hanging there with no apparent reason. The tree, I mean, it's very much angular. It's if you go back, let's look back at it. Things at tangents, our inner worlds there. You know, why is this character almost like conjoined twins here? There's no conjoined twins in Wojciech, but in Robert Wilson's production, there seemingly is. Luminous vibrations, lighting should it's not naturalistic. It's giving us luminous vibration. Again, nowadays we're quite used to this, going to rock shows, you know, this type of lighting, which is sort of atmospheres, getting down with lasers, you know, trying to get down into our psyche, into our deeper souls, if you like. So luminous vibrations, Artaud called it. And acting, here's Berkoff, who was very taken by Artaud. Acting, interruptions, disturbances. Impersonal, the sense of not being a character. You should be an athlete of the heart. So you're like a physical athlete, but not quite. You see, the actor is a heart athlete. With a physical athlete, the breathing relies on the body, whereas the athlete of the heart, the actor's body relies on the breathing. So breath comes first. Now, this was explained to me like this, okay? Now, this again is from Artaud. So this is from the Theatre in its Double. The way to achieve the actor of the heart is through breath control. And we have these three states: androgynous, balanced, and neuter, okay, is one. Male, expanding and positive, and female, attracting and negative. Now, you might say, well, that's a bit sexist, Artaud, and probably he was, people of that time weren't necessarily. Look, please don't get hung up on that. I want to explain this by using the sea. Now, I don't know if you've been to a sea on a reasonably stormy day, not too stormy so you're in the tempest with King Lear's beard in the storm and all that, because, I just want you to experience these three states. Now, you've got the wave just about to build. Things are balanced, neutral, nothing quite happening. Okay? And then it moves up and crashes down. That's the sort of what he calls the male breath. And then the sort of going out, towards, that's the female, the negative, the going. So you've got perhaps the holding of breath. The sea crashing down. And that breath control. Brilliant acting, Martin. That breath control should be at the basis of what you do as a performer. Look, Artaud wasn't really trying this out. What I do know is that he was shouting and hitting at an actress who wasn't doing it the way he wanted, merde, whack, no, whack, I mean, difficult guy to work for. Probably you would get all sorts of accusations about the way he was treating you if that was happening these days. But Artaud. So athlete of the heart. Here's again Berkoff looking at it. The athlete of the heart is from the body mind. Okay? Now, Berkoff took this sort of idea, and if you look at any Berkoff's work online, you will see a lot of this in what he talks about. But this is Artaud's writing here. The bodily organism and the affective organism, the psychic, the corporeal, the mental. There must be a mutual correspondence, no space in between. Every movement of the body is connected to everything else. It's not purely mechanical and it's not pure chance. And this is clearly the most important thing. The actor must only do movements which involve his total being. Absolute diligence, cosmic rigor, necessity, being in harmony with your necessity, submitting to it, being in harmony to it, what you have to do, alive within the score, all the way through. And the director is a bit of a dominatrix, really. You got rid of the author, you got rid of the producer, the director's gone, you got a creator responsible for play, for action, for everything. Okay. I've got a picture here of Julie Taymor, which she's not quite like that, but I'll come to Lion King in a bit. So there's Artaud sort of magicking things up there. A magic coordinator, a master of sacred ceremonies, creating things around him. And the creator had to impose their will onto the performers, who were turned into powerful, evocative hieroglyphs. Let's just have a look at this picture a bit. Yeah, this is, you have to do what you're told, and you become these sort of devoid of having your own sense of what you want to do, but you have to give in to what the creator wants you to do, and then you have to give it everything, and within that score you find your life through it. Of course, you find a place to be, and this is the stage language, hieroglyphic stage language. Everything fits together, but you can as a member of the audience, turn around in your swiveling chair and see different things around you. Getting different points of view of it, of course. But it all works emotively. You can feel what's going on around you here. And first, this theatre must exist for the audience to go to it, of course. You know, the audience exists, but they don't exist until you make the theatre, and then they go and find, gosh, you like this too, you know. And he intended to do all sorts of shows here, an adaptation of Shakespeare even. The Story of Bluebeard, The Fall of Jerusalem, and one of Marquis de Sade's tales. I've got a picture here of a piece done by Peter Brook about the Marquis de Sade. There's a film of it online you can have a look at. The Theatre of Cruelty season that Peter Brook did. I'll come to that as well. Buchner's Wojciech was something he wanted to do as well, just to show a reaction against his own principles. But you know, Wojciech, a great influence on Brecht, a great influence on Artaud, and Robert Wilson's production of Wojciech here, the murder that's at near the climax of the play here, done extraordinarily beautifully. I saw this production, and the emotion from it was extraordinarily different to any other production I've seen of Wojciech, I must say. He talks about the conquest of Mexico, and he read this and tell me, you know, how up to date this seems. He wants to stage the conquest of Mexico, and it really is taking on the colonizational ideas, the colonized, the colonizer. But also he's sort of bringing out, and he has a sense of, I don't know, perhaps it's a sense of Orientalism, perhaps the exotic, the pagan, and perhaps he's sort of emphasizing this. But this became something he thinks would be wonderful to perform, to really let us think about Western society and the way we are within it. And Peter Schaffer does something. Oh, I've brought myself on here in two big pictures there. Sorry about that. That was frightened me there. Perhaps that was a shock that was intended. You never know. The Royal Hunt of the Sun. And Schaffer wrote, "My hope was to realize on stage a kind of total theatre." That's what Artaud is argued as a piece of total theatre. Not only words, but rites, mimes, masks, magic. You see, a musician's piece, a pantomime piece, a designer's piece. Schaffer, very influenced by Artaud's ideas. And The Royal Hunt of the Sun, again, you could argue, definitely influenced by Artaud's work, A Theatre of Cruelty. Now, Artaud talks about A Spurt of Blood. Jet du Sang is a play he wrote. Very short play, I must say, but I've seen productions of it that have lasted 2.5 hours or so. Now, Cardullo, writing about this, says, Artaud creates violent images of cruelty, a world in which the sky bombards human beings. Go back there to Lot and his daughters, the sky bombarding human beings, shaking them to their core. The spurt of blood attacks the senses with bizarre sights and sounds as it reaches towards our subconscious impulses and fears. That's a great description of what Artaud's theatre should be like. And his play does it. It's an extraordinary piece of work. Here's a selection from it. Young girl. It's not at the beginning of the play. It's sort of halfway down. It's only one page. I mean, seriously. Anyway, we love each other. Young man, we are intense. Ah, how beautiful the world is built. Silence. There is a noise as if an immense wheel were turning and moving the air. A hurricane separates them. At the same time, two stars are seen colliding, and from them fall a series of legs of living flesh with feet, hands, sculpts, masks, colonnades, porticos, temples, alembics, falling more and more slowly as if falling in a vacuum. Then three scorpions, one after another, and finally a frog and a beetle, which come to rest with desperate slowness, nauseating slowness. The sky has gone mad! Let's hurry away from here. Enter a medieval knight in gigantic armour, followed by a wet nurse holding her breasts in her hands and puffing because her breasts are swollen. Yeah, well, you try putting that on stage. And I think if you go to some theatre schools, you will try and do this in first or second term. You'll be made to try and do this. And you can see the problems you might have as a set designer and a technician on Artaud's productions. But these days we can do it better, you know, but it's and obviously a film could do it easily now with CGI and things like that, but we can do this type of thing in the theatre. When Artaud's writing this, probably couldn't at all, well, not easily, but now we can do similar things. And I was working on this with some students, and we talk about we were trying to perform it and best we could as a physical theatre piece. I mean, it was completely and utterly awful, probably very self-indulgent, you know, the worst sort of excesses of drama theatre students, you know, doing this sort of thing. But we were having a great time. But then we came out of the theatre workshop space we were working in to this scene that was on TV, and we shivered. The Twin Towers were falling, bodies were falling, things falling from the sky. And horribly, we were later to find one of our ex-students was on the top floor of one of the towers and died at this moment. The anarchy of that moment, life-changing, making you think about what it's all about, shocking you to your core. But this is an underlying problem with Artaud to some extent. I mean, he talks about anarchy, and yes, perhaps it's he would see an organized anarchy, perhaps as what he wanted to do. Artaud developed an approach to theatre that is inherently fascistic in its relationship to and effect on the audience. This is someone writing quite critically about Artaud, and you can read her work again. I think a lot of it's online. Kimberly General. Organised anarchy. What happened at the Capitol recently in the last few weeks? If you have an audience that are completely free of thought and just sort of react to things physically, emotionally, and see words as having the meaning they have in dreams, what can be here? Well, she's making a point that this is a fascistic relationship to theatre. And she sort of makes a connection that Artaud was a deeply authoritarian man. You have to do what he said. The theatre of cruelty represents sadistic fantasies of power and control. It's an uncanny similarity to mass politics emerging at the time he was writing his essays. And she compares it to audiences as a mass entity for the purposes of political manipulation. You know, the theatre of Mussolini and Hitler was not the theatre as Artaud would envisage it, but was similar in that it was appealing to the senses, that to whip you up into a frenzy. And what was the whipping up into the frenzy of the Capitol building? And, it's whipping up emotions in order to against all sort of thought and logic. Perhaps there are problems with Artaud's way of thinking about theatre. Well, perhaps there are, perhaps there aren't. He's had a big influence on people who aren't like Mussolini and Hitler and Donald Trump. And so it's physical theatre. It's non-Western, perhaps you could say. It's total theatre. It believes in discipline, technology, and spectacle. Those things are all engaged in it. It's influenced living theatre, Judith Malina and Julian Beck's living theatre, which was sort of anarchic troupe. So not at all fascistic. The opposite of Donald Trump's politics. This is perhaps, this far away from Trumpism as you can get. The hippies, doing their organized anarchy, and they were influenced by Artaud. Jerzy Grotowski, though he did write about Artaud, says he's not completely influenced by Artaud. He tried to distance himself from the work, but he loves the idea of signalling through the flames, the absolute discipline for what he called poor theatre or his theatre laboratory. Very influenced there by that one idea of signalling through the flames. Eugenio Barba, the Odin Theatret, again, an international theatre troupe, non-Western. Looking at that, just at that picture, you can see some of the themes that Artaud talked about in terms of costume, in terms of instruments, in terms of masks and objects of strange proportions, all those things that perhaps are there in Barber's work. Peter Brook, he did the first ever theatre cruelty season in London, 1964. That's when the first production of Spurt of Blood was done. I don't know how it went. I can't imagine it was a big success, but you never know. Perhaps you can do one. Perhaps you can do one when you return to school, in your theatre classes. Just do one. See how it goes. I don't mean just do one. I mean just do a production of. My friend Ken Campbell here talked about total theatre, and he wrote this thing here about for The Guardian 2001 how he would make the National Theatre if he got his hands on it. Just read that. A dog that sings, a canine chorus, sensational drama, Quidditch matches, going on above your head, all these sorts of strange things. Anyway, I'll leave you to look at that in your own time. Punch and Judy, he talked like that. Punch and Judy, shut up. All right, I'll move on quickly. Shock, forced entertainment. Now I went to see Forced Entertainment, and there they are doing their show here. And as you can see, I'm stuck myself. That's better. I stuck myself underneath somehow there. There they are having a fight on stage, and I saw this piece, and they were having a fight. I mean, it drew blood, and this seemed to be very, very real. These people involved in this, disciplined, focused to that extent. But yeah, a sensibility reaching a point where we surely need theatre wakes us up, heart and nerves. Robert Lepage, Far Side of the Moon, where cows turn into women, women turn into cows. This is a wonderful thing where a laundorama turns into a spaceship. A laundrette turns into a spaceship. Far Side of the Moon, wonderful. But his work, Robert Lepage, fantastic stuff. Jacques Lecoq, a great influence on Theatre de Complicité, on Stephen Berkoff. Very much the athleticism. He was a PE teacher, I think, Lecoq. The athleticism, the athletes of the heart, the relationship between movement and emotion. This was very much Lecoq's work. And again, he liked clowning. He loved the idea of masks and all these things. So again, well worth looking at Lecoq's work, is trying to find a way that Artaud could be envisaged today. Artaud seemed to be articulating everything I'd ever felt about what theatre could be, says Berkoff. So again, look at Berkoff's work, particularly perhaps Metamorphosis and The Trial and work like that. Though very much the heart athlete. If you ever see any of his performances, very focused, very alive within the score. Complicite, alive within the score all the way through. The complete use of the concrete language of the stage, the physical aspects of it. Again, a student of Lecoq. Pina Bausch. I'm going to throw Pina Bausch in because I love Pina Bausch, but again, concrete language of the stage, you know, how you communicate through dance, through things that are beyond the meaning that words have, you know, the extraordinary use of dance here and being alive within the score again. Have a look at some of her work. This is Nelken. DV8, again, Enter Achilles. Again, the whole thing. Basically, I'm saying physical theatre has been influenced by Artaud. So physical theatre and dance theatre and performance art, where we cross over the lines between theatre, dance, art, everything that communicates to an audience, perhaps not just in words or not heavily in words. And therefore, Sarah Kane hadn't read Artaud with her early work, Blasted, which you could say was very Artaudian in lots of ways, especially when it gets more surreal in the second act, but when the explosion goes off particularly, perhaps. But 448 Psychosis was written after she had read Artaud and after her work had been compared to Artaud a lot. And 448 Psychosis is perhaps a realization of Artaud's work, perhaps. Shock-headed Peter? Yeah, strange one. I think so. Objects of strange proportions, puppets, music there. Music with a strange sound. Just listening to Martin Jake's voice, it's singing it. If you know anything about Shock-headed Peter, then you'll know what I'm talking about. If you don't know anything about it, look it up. Look it up. It's wonderful stuff. Wonderful stuff. And Judy Taymor, as I said, in Lion King. Involves this is someone talking about Taymor. The theatre, as Antonin Artaud said, involves a flirtation with danger, and Taymor conscientiously dances on the edge. And Taymor reaches out to African theatre, to Sri Lankan theatre, to various influences. It takes the shaman takes inanimate objects and imbues it with supernatural powers, maybe a puppet or a doll or a mask, and she uses that in her work. I mean, though it's very Disneyfied at points, there is something very magical about Lion King, especially where you see objects of strange proportions suddenly made in front of you, a dream sequence of the ghost of the lion coming back to talk to his son. The clouds turn into the face of the lion and then go back to clouds again. That's that kind of thing. But also the puppets, object strange proportions, the walking in the audience, the sounds, the first sound itself. You know, this is beyond a psychological theatre. This is certainly working with your emotions. And Artaud. There he is. I hope you've got something from this talk on Artaud, and perhaps I'll do something else sometime soon. Au revoir.